Hello everybody, hope you're doing okay. Now, the New York Marathon, an awful lot to talk about this week, but I thought on this channel we ought to really talk about the actual race first of all. So here we got the men's elite field down to the last two, and the winner in white from the Netherlands was Abdi Nagy in a time of 2:7:39 from Evans Jabet there, who's just taken the lead in 2:7:45. A very good race. They went through halfway in 1:5 in a big pack, and a group of about 4 or 5 got away, and then it whittled down to two in the end, and Nagy took it. In the women's race, it also came down to a final two-runner race, and Sheila Kipterui here from Kenya took it in a time of 2:24:35 from Helen Obiri, who probably was the favourite in 2:24:49. So yeah, very good race. Another one where they had a big negative split in the end. It's New York Marathon is undoubtedly the toughest of the marathon majors and one of the few that doesn't have any pacemakers in it. So yeah, it is a real like a championship race. Okay, so if we come on to the YouTubers, and one of the most famous YouTubers in any sphere, not just running, is Casey Neistat here with 12 million, I think, subscribers. Not quite the 22 million that some aspire to, but maybe they'll get there one day. Anyway, I didn't really realise that he was a runner until recently, and it turned out he is quite an avid runner and a Brooks fan. In fact, he'd actually linked up with Brooks and wasn't, though, wearing any of their carbon fibre plated shoes. You might argue, do they really have any good ones? But the Hyperion Elite was worn, I think, by CJ Albertson, who came 10th in the race, I think. So yeah, good run by him. But Casey used a pair of Maxes or something, just a sort of normal, ordinary daily trainer. So it turns out that Casey here ran a time of 2:57:48, very well even pace. He was 1:28:30 at halfway. And it was the first time he'd ever actually run a sub-3 in New York, although he had run apparently a bit quicker in the Tuscan Marathon. But he, as a native of New York, you can see that he was very pleased with his efforts. And he just finished behind Matt Choi and Ben Parker. Now, Ben Parker, as you might recall from last week's video when I featured the Runna podcast, is their chief executive officer and their founder. Now, it seemed to me that he was pacing Matt Choi, because when I looked at his Strava, their times were identical, and if you look on the pictures here, then you can see Matt somewhere in the background. There he is. And if you look at some of the pictures from the ubiquitous Shakeout runs, here is Matt and Ben together going on a Runna Shakeout run. Clearly Matt Choi and the runner had teamed up, so it would appear that Matt Choi was following a runner plan for the New York Marathon, and it all seemed very well, because I think Matt Choi did a 2:57:15, exact same time as Ben here. And I think for Matt, that was a PB. However, it turned out that Matt had actually been disqualified from the race, and apparently has been banned for life from the New York Roadrunners races, i.e. he can't run the New York Marathon anymore. What actually transpired, that he'd actually been followed by two of his entourage on e-bikes who were filming him, and allegedly, Runna didn't know anything about that. And indeed, if you go on to Let's Run of all places, you've got Josh here, who's their chief operating officer, basically making a statement that basically disowning Matt, and it turned out that according to them, they didn't know about his previous antics, which were fairly well documented. I thought that he'd had people following him before, and I think in one of the marathons, I think at the Houston, he got a race bib without actually entering. He just borrowed it off somebody else. So yeah, perhaps have a bit of a history for this. I think Matt is a runner and a sort of YouTuber, was pretty more of an Instagram guy, but he does a lot on YouTube as well. In a way, I kind of quite find him fascinating, because it's someone that you would never associate with myself, because I just don't feel like I could ever be like that. So you kind of admire somebody for having that sort of presence, but at the same time, it's almost like cringe, the actual sort of things he does in a running space. I think he often would do a race and, you know, eat 6 gels, put on the start line and need to go to the loo after a mile or two. And you think, well, at least this time he actually seemed to run a very good race. But this seems to have backfired a bit to me for Runna. They were sort of hoping to get a lot of PR out of this, and then quickly backtracking. So yeah, what do you make of all this stuff? It does make it a bit of a lottery of the running scene and a bit of a circus. But on the other hand, it gets people talking about it. And yeah, perhaps that's the whole idea. So interesting, if you look on Matt's Instagram, he's actually put out a statement where he's basically apologising, taking full ownership for what has happened, which I think is very, very good of him. A lot of comments saying, well, it's a bit little too late and all that sort of stuff. But to a certain extent, what else could he have done? I mean, you might argue that he would only make this statement because he got caught out, but perhaps he just didn't think that he was doing anything wrong. And yeah, in this space, well, perhaps it's a case of if you got away with it before, you think it's okay. Obviously, didn't get away with it this time, and yeah, it's a bit of a backlash. But as I said, you're kind of thinking, well, I've got mixed sort of thoughts here. I mean, on the one hand, as I said, it's a bit cringeworthy. On the other hand, you think, well, the guy did a 2:57, put in some effort, and heart sort of in the right place. And interestingly, he's not really actually selling anything. I mean, he's got a Nike top on here. Interesting, he doesn't usually wear a top. But, as a friend said, maybe he's taking this seriously. But in the race, he wasn't wearing a top. He was just wearing that black cap back to front and some black shorts. So he wasn't really actually advertising anything. I think he had some Alpha Flies on. But as far as I know, he's not got any official connection with Nike. So yeah, in that sense, it's not like an influencer who's been flown out to a particular race by a particular brand, expected to wear their shoes and say nice things about that brand that week and then move on to the next brand next week. Yeah, so I'm interested to hear what you think about all this in the comments. If we look at the results of the men's elite race, scrolling down a bit, we see in 6th place is Conor Mantz and 7th place Clayton Young here, his training partner. Now those two guys are undoubtedly now America's top male marathon runners for the 3rd race in a row. Basically, Conor's just pipped Clayton. He just pipped him in the US trials earlier this year, just beat him in the Olympics, and again, he just beat him in the New York Marathon. So some comment to say that, well, is Conor only interested in beating Clayton? Well, I think obviously those two train together. You would expect them to be fairly close. From the training videos, you all saw that Conor is a runner that's slightly better at the moment. He seems to just sort of lead some of the sessions, is always wanting to get out there. Very much the sort of front runner. I remember when he ran the NCAs a couple of years ago, the cross country that is, he was very much to the fore. And in that sort of race, it really is gun to the metal, as it were. But yeah, I think a very fine race from both of those two. Let's have a look at Clayton's splits here. And as I said, it was quite a slow start for the elite race. They were all together in basically 1:5:36 at halfway. And he sped up to a 2:9:21, and Conor Mantz did a 2:09:00. So let's have a quick look at Conor's stats. Yeah, you can see that they're all together at halfway, and he sped up slightly to a 2:09. So even though they did a massive negative split, both of them still really weren't quite able to go with that change of pace. Just goes to show sometimes that the level of these elite athletes, I mean, they were doing a 1:05 mid, and they sped up to a 1:02, and that on a course which is arguably the toughest of all of the big races. If we go back to the excellent footage provided by Total Running Productions, who undoubtedly are the #1 channel for having race recaps and these little summary videos. In fact, I was quite amused to see that he actually got this video out before the race had actually even finished. There were some people that if they took, say, more than 3.5 hours, I think they were still coming in as this race recap video was already out, which was quite of amazing. It must do an awful lot of prep in advance, or has this off a very good way. Anyway, let's have a look at all the people that I was tracking. Anya Culling here, 3:23. You're kind of thinking, well, what's going on with her? Because last year she was running 2:34, and she's kind of dying off the fact that she went from a 4-hour marathon runner to a 2-hour marathon runner. What's she doing going back to a 3-hour marathon runner? Well, it turned out she also works for the Runna app. And if you scroll down to the end here, she was actually pacemaking Adele Roberts, who you may have heard from Big Brother. She was a Radio 1 presenter, I think, and a general presenter. So those two were running together. And I don't quite understand why the Runner app feels that they need to go and pacemake these famous people. It kind of backfired a bit with Matt Choi. And you're kind of thinking, well, with Adele, she'd already run 2 other marathons, and this was the slowest of the ones. So not as if she didn't know how to run a 3:23. So yeah, there is an element here that they just want to get maximum brand exposure, which all comes down to the influencer thing, doesn't it? So yeah, I mean, maybe it's just not my cup of tea in that sense, but you're kind of thinking, well, they seem to have a good time. Some exposure to Runner. You might argue that's perhaps not the exposure they really wanted from what's happened, but yeah, at the end of the day, they need to get people subscribing to that app and get that in people's mindsets, one presumes. So Ben Parker, we already mentioned. Aubrey came in just under 5 hours. I think it was a very tough day out for him, and excellent running, really, to be honest, having had his first marathon in Berlin about 5 weeks ago. He had 2 half marathons in the interim, and this one, I think he did say it was the hardest race he'd ever done, which I imagine it's also the longest run he's ever done by some way, at least in time-wise. So a well-deserved rest for him now. Interesting to see what he does next, whether he'll be coming out with Believe in the Run again next spring, or whether he'll now have enough presence to be able to go out on his own, and what races will he do between then and now. Megan Murray from Believe in the Run, she did 3:20, so I think obviously she wasn't going at all that for a time this time. Conor Mance and Clayton we've already covered. Ben Johnson, who did a bit of videos, quite a lot of Alpha 5-3 videos, and Big Rig on Instagram. Unfortunately, didn't finish this time. Prolific marathon runner. He'd already ran Chicago and Berlin, but I think he said in his post that he had a bit of knee pain and decided to stop when he saw his family. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes it just goes to show that people aren't sort of superhuman and you can't keep running marathons every time. But I think ultimately, probably a sensible decision to stop. Nick Bester was also doing the kind of pacing thing. He did a 2:44. I wasn't sure that he was actually really pacing anyone in particular. I think he just basically fancied having a run out in New York. I think it's probably another notch on his 6-star episode. But it's interesting that, did you see that Sydney Marathon has now been added to this marathon majors? So we know we've got 7 marathon majors, and that one's going to be in the end of August. So I think it's going to be very difficult for all the Shakeout Run World Tour people to get round to all these races. And I think there's also talk of Cape Town and Shanghai, was it, to also be added. So in a couple of years' time, we could have 9 marathon majors, which are kind of thinking, well, can you really have that many races? I mean, the elites can't run more than a spring one and an autumn one. So are there really enough elite runners to go around, or is this whole thing becoming a bit of a money grab? And yeah, I mean, I think I read that the 6-star is going to continue from the original 6 ones, but obviously they're going to have a badge for you to do whatever ones they end up having. So yeah, I think people will like sort of saving up to that. And then it's interesting for the people that live in sort of Europe and America. They're running a marathon at the end of August will be rather contrary to what normally happens. So I'm interested to see how many people actually go down for that Sydney one. But I suppose in a way it's good that it's come outside of Europe and America in the main. Obviously you've got Tokyo, but that one is perhaps the hardest one to actually get into if you're not actually from Japan. So yeah, I guess it's good that they've been spread around a bit, but you feel there's only so many of these big races you can really have. So scrolling down a bit, Martin Yelling, who is the podcaster, former elite athlete, he was running around, I think, with his co-podcast host, Dina Castor, the former elite American runner. So they went around in 4:26. So good to see those two still running. I mean, obviously not really running at sort of a serious level anymore, but yeah, I'm sure that they had a good time out. Steve Pennington is a guy that's not really famous. He's just a guy that I know from the Sub-3 Marathon group. And rather embarrassingly, he sort of tried to say hello to me at the start of the London Marathon a couple of years ago. I didn't really know quite who he was. I kind of blanked him, so apologies for that. And we've already covered Sheila Chepkirui, the female winner, Amjad Nagy, the male runner. A very good run there from Johnny Mellor from Britain, 2:11. First British guy home. And he was with the pace until halfway, basically carried on the same again. So, again, just goes to show how the difference in quality of these people. But 2:11 in New York is a very, very fine run. Lily Partridge there was the top British lady, 2:30.55. That's a very fine run. I mean, you might argue what is the equivalent of that on another course. I mean, you might argue that's probably around about 2:25 elsewhere, but obviously the times that you do at this level are the ones that count, not the what-ifs. Casey Neistat we've covered. Jared Ward is interesting because a lot of people say, well, where are all the Saucony athletes? Why is like the Endorphin Pro 4, the Endorphin Elite, quite a shoe that's well loved by amateur athletes, but basically, I don't think Saucony really sponsor any true elite athletes. I mean, Jared Ward was probably America's best marathon runner a few years ago, but I think he's now past his best, still works for them, still wearing the shoes, but he was only a 2:19 there, which obviously for aspiring YouTuber running sub 2:20 was the big aim, but for someone like him, I think he's been around about 2:10 before, then obviously not quite as good as he was. But yeah, good to see that these athletes are still coming out. I think it was interesting that this is clearly the race with all the Americans that come out. And I think if we look at the leaderboard and have a look at the top American men, Conor Mance, you've got Clayton Young, CJ Albertson, That's three sort of household names. Frank Lara was in the lead for a while. Scrolling down, you see Gerald Ward in there, 13th. Jacob Riley is another athlete I've heard of, although he only did 2:32, which is only just better than my PB, so still better. Let's have a look at the top American women. And we had Sarah Vaughan, Jessica McLean, Keelan Taylor, Des Linden, the Brooks athlete. She's the one that won the Boston Marathon a few years back when it was that terrible day when it was really cold, really wet. So, yeah, I think she's now a W40, so good to see that she's still running well, subs 2:30. And I did also notice that Jenny Simpson, who was the former world champion at the 1500 metres on the track, I think allegedly that's her last race as a elite athlete. She sort of had a bit of a swan song career in the marathon, and it's a fine sort of way to go out with a 2:31.54. Now, it seems I might not be the only person that goes around talking about the Influencer World Tour. Sakuso Running's been on the act as well, and he talked about the social media Shakeout Run World Tour in his video where he talked about the super shoes used in the New York Marathon. I thought it was interesting because he was kind of backtracking a bit on this, and I think maybe he was a bit worried that people got the wrong idea. I think he obviously took it as a joke, and I saw it straight away as a joke, but I think sometimes you have to sort of clarify what you're on about here. And I think someone did point out that he is a social media influencer, which begs the question, am I a social media influencer myself? I always think of an influencer as somebody who's really trying to sell you something or influence your opinion. I mean, I suppose in a way, this sort of video is actually trying to influence your opinion because I'm saying this, that, and the other, and generally you either agree with me or you don't. What I have noticed in shoe videos that if I like a particular shoe, then invariably the people that watch my video, because they're generally subscribers or interested, will generally agree with me, and vice versa. If I don't like a shoe, they'd also follow suit. And I've seen that with other shoes. If I like one shoe and I saw a video where they don't like it, or vice versa, those comments can align. So it's very interesting about how all this sort of stuff comes about, and are people's opinions influenced by what people like me say? I mean, I don't think I'm really an influencer in the way of like people buying stuff, but yeah, as I said, well, maybe I'm influencing your opinions on all this stuff. Interested to know what you think about that in the comments. So moving along from the New York Marathon, it was good to see that Rose Harvey, the GB international marathon runner who ran for Britain in the Olympics, but sadly had a rather bad injury and just about managed to finish, is now almost back to running, which is great to see. She hosts the 5 Miles Easy podcast, which I featured last week, so definitely worth checking that out. Now, completely a different world altogether from the New York Marathon. This is the Trackstar channel, which is hosted by Alfie Manthorpe, who's the founder of it, and he's talking about a cross-country race that he did at the weekend. Very much bread and butter running in the UK. This is the National Cross Country Relays, and he's one of the leading endurance athletes in the country. So he was just talking about his own race, and also mentioned a few of the Team Macau athletes who are mainly Hoka-sponsored athletes like Callum Elson were also running. So I think it was good to see that it was actually Callum's first race back after his terrible Achilles tear when he got tripped up in the World Indoors, as you may recall. So yeah, if you're interested in sort of what I might call proper inverted commas athletics, where it's not a series of shakeout runs, it's just people trying their best in a cross-country race, then worth checking this one out. And they've also recently started a podcast with Lloyd Kempson, who's the other brains behind this Trackstar outfit now, and also a lady called Rosie, whose surname escapes me, but she's an up-and-coming female presenter, so definitely worth checking that podcast out as well. Now, I don't think I featured Ben Felton here. Ben is running. He's now got 113,000 subscribers, and he started full-time YouTube, I think, when he was only about 10,000 subscribers. So it just goes to show that if you're really can put your mind to this, then you can really do well on YouTube. And he's what I would call a sub-elite runner. He's training for the Valencia Marathon. Now, as you may recall, last week I mentioned there's a bit of rain in the air in Valencia, which I thought at the time, thought nothing of it. And then we saw that terrible news of all the floods in Valencia, and sadly all the people who lost their lives. So obviously the marathon is meant to be staged in early December, and Ben is obviously training for this marathon, and this was one of his long runs, 35k along the seafront in Southend, where he's just relating that. And it was interesting, some of the comments about whether that marathon will be going ahead, and it seems to be that the organisers are going to let people know next week, and there's a few comments from people who live locally saying that although the area of the actual marathon course in the city of Valencia is probably okay, obviously the whole place is in a bit of a state, and the infrastructure is obviously really struggling. And yeah, I mean, you would think it would be very hard for it to be staged. On the other hand, it does bring in an awful lot of tourism and revenue for the area. So you think, well, I'm not quite sure. I mean, obviously I'm not running it, and it doesn't really impact me at all. But you kind of think it's going to be very difficult for that race to go ahead. But on the other hand, if that does actually help out the economy and all the people trying to recover their whatever's left of their houses and whatever, then you think, well, maybe that would be a good idea, but I just can't think logistically that could really happen. But no doubt we'll find that out next week. And it looks like there's quite a few people who will be running in Valencia, and obviously if they can't run, then not that time of year, there's not really any alternative marathons. But I think Seville now is fully booked up as well. So yeah, sometimes that's just sport, isn't it? And sometimes things are more important than running. Now, in a recent edition of the YouTuber News, I featured my friend Ben Notley here, who was doing this mad run, 100-mile Greensand Way. Well, it turned out it was actually a 115-mile run, and I didn't quite realise at the time he was going for an FKT, fastest known time. And it turns out that he actually managed to do it. So he ended up running from Kent over to Hazelmere on the Surrey-Hampshire border, and he had quite a big crew out actually, so it was very good to see this. And I was actually away at the time. I might have come down and cheered him on. Although Dan Runs, another fellow Guildford trail runner, said he turned up at 4:30 in the morning in Thursley, which is a place just off the A3, and then helped him run into Hazelmere. So if you go and check out his page, he's doing fundraising for cancer research. I think he's raised just under £3,000, which is a very sterling effort. And yeah, so definitely worth checking out. And I hope to catch up with Ben sometime for a run. Probably not in the dark though, because Sue doesn't like me running in the dark for sure. And as I like to feature some of my running friends on this news item, here is Dan Runs himself. He's another Guildford trail runner. He's had a bit of a difficult time this year with injuries, although he did say he's had a new baby, so congratulations for him there. And he did into a few races, but I don't think he's really in the mood for it. But he's done a few videos. He's helping out Ben on, as I said, on his Greensand Way run. And he was doing a run here up near Box Hill and Copthorne. And he mentioned an interesting video, the tethered documentary film. There, you can just see the link in the show notes underneath. And that's a film talking about a blind runner going to be doing this run in the Box Hill Copthorne area. So there's a little trailer on that, which is worth having a look. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see when that comes out. No idea when it's coming out, but yeah, so good for Dan to point that out to us there. And we did joke on some of his other videos, it's almost totally in the dark and he needs to get a head torch. But maybe not a guy on an e-bike following him though. Now another channel I thought is quite a good one for a bit of light-hearted entertainment is Cram My Run. This is the infamous Jay Mills, and he does basically a headcam view of the video, then he does a voice over it later on. So this is the start of the Beachy Head 10K, which I did a segment attempt up this one. It comes out from the prom at Eastbourne and eventually goes straight up in the air. And I don't remember having so much lactate on a segment attempt for quite a long time. But this is actually the start of the race, and basically you go from like just starting off a race like casually to sort of maximum heart rate within about 100 yards, but just vertically up in the air. So any hope you've got of running a very fast first mile in this race goes completely out the window, because you've got people almost virtually climbing up the steps here or to the side, whatever. And he was basically racing his brother D Mills. Now, I'm sure I could tell you who J Mills and D Mills actually stand for, but that's not quite the point of it. And it's like the fact that J Mills is basically hunting down all these people, and he'll make comments about the guy in front that will have a black vest, and the guy there with the checkered red and white flag will get some mention, or he'll have blue shoes, or the guy in the blue hat. It's all quite entertaining. Sometimes I do wonder about these sort of headcam views, because if you're a YouTuber, all you really get is a view of the person in front of you. You never actually get a view of it from behind. So in a way, it's sort of like watching paint dry, watching these people sort of ambling away from you. But this really does sort of bring it to life, and you get like these stats on here as well. And I think in this particular run, he was trying to beat his brother, who had actually beat him last year, and his brother was notorious for coming back at the end with a very fast descent. Spoiler alert, he didn't actually manage to lose this time, and J Mills won from D Mills. So sometimes I like to feature some non-running YouTube videos. Now this was an interesting one that caught my eye. This is Matt Stevens, the former British professional road racing champion, who is now very big on social media and does a lot of this sort of presenting stuff, doing a ride with Andrew Ridgeley, who you may remember from Wham. Looking a bit older perhaps than he was from the 80s, but yeah, it's quite entertaining this one. They go out in Cornwall on a day which is obviously a bit sunnier and warmer than it has been of late. But yeah, so it's interesting to see the chat on this one. So if you've got to spare half an hour, then worth checking out. And Sigma Sports is where I got all my bikes from. It's quite a shop quite near to me. Probably spent too much money there over the years. So it's kind of relieved that I'm kind of not doing too much cycling at the moment. Every time I mention possibility of having a new bike, she says no. And well, I think maybe need to work on that. And she said, oh, you've got 5 bikes in the garage and none of you have ridden for a while. Well, I've got my time trial bike on my turbo train. I need to get back to running that a bit. My Achilles is still a bit sore. But yeah, this stuff does give me inspiration. And Sigma Sports themselves up to 100k subscribers. Matt does quite a lot of these cafe rides. It's sort of occasional series, maybe about one a month, but I think he's a very good presenter. And if you remember him from the GCN days, I'm not sure that GCN was ever quite the same after he left, but yeah, definitely worth checking out. And I think that in this, they actually pick a LP each, and later on they go and talk about what they chose. I think Matt, spoiler alert, picked ABBA, and I think Andrew picked Joy Division, I think. May be wrong on that, but anyway, you can watch it to find out. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting this week. Sorry it's a bit too much about the New York Marathon, but I thought in terms of YouTuber news, it was definitely an event to cover. And I think next week we'll be back to more trying to pick out videos that have a bit more sort of down-to-earth, real-world situations going on with all these big races having stopped. But we're interested to see what happens with Valencia. Just hope that works out for the best, whichever way that goes. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. Like and subscribe to that, and see you in the next one then. Bye.